Galatians chapter 1, and it says, Shaul, an emissary, not from men, nor by a man, but by Yahushua, Messiah, and Yahweh, the Father, who raised him from the dead. Here, this word emissary, there are several opinions regarding what the word would be in Hebrew. As I have mentioned, I have a translation that was made from the Greek to what it is believed the original Hebrew would have been, basically using the vocabulary of the Old Covenant from the Tanakh and using the words that Yahweh would use through the Ruach to replace those that were found in the Greek text that pretty much we have nowadays. And they made this Hebrew New Covenant, which has as the word for emissary here, and I agree with it, the word malach. And pretty much saying that once Yahweh gave the Ruach in Shavuot, those who believed in Mashiach would become the new Malachim, the ones that Yahweh would now use to fulfill his purpose. So Shaul, an emissary, not from men, nor by a man, right? Malachim normally are emissaries of Yahweh, sent by Yahweh, not by men. And obviously he's referring to the fact that he was not appointed by people, by a certain elite men or by certain priests or whatever. He was appointed to do this mission by Yahweh through his son, Yahushua HaMashiach. So here he says, not from men, nor by a man, but by Yahushua, the Messiah. So he's saying that he's Yahushua's emissary. And this is one of many connections in scriptures that show how Shaul represents the last. For if we go to the last chapter of the book of Revelation, chapter 22, we see that it says, I, Yahushua, have sent my messenger to witness to these matters in the assemblies. Right? My malach is what it would be, or my emissary. So Shaul, an emissary not from man, nor by a man, but by Yahushua HaMashiach and Yahweh the Father. And I say Yahweh here because I do believe Yahweh would have been the name there because he's talking about the Father. So we need to know the name of that Father because Elohim is a title. So it would be like saying in and the Father, who is a doctor, right? We wouldn't know what doctor or what father. We need to know the name of that father, and then we would know, oh yeah, the doctor, right? So in that case, Yahweh, yeah, of course, Elohim. So, but by Yahushua HaMashiach and Yahweh the Father, who raised him from the dead, right? And just like it's saying the name of the Messiah here, he would have the name of the Father here. And all the brothers who are with me to the assemblies of Galatia. So this comes from Shaul and all the brothers with him to those who were in Galatia. Now, as you guys know, names are important. So let me go for a moment to the concordance. Galatia means the land of the Gali. Doesn't give us the root for that either. A foreign origin. A group of Celtic peoples of mainland Europe in the Iron Age and the Roman period. The original homeland was known as Gaul. They spoke Gaulish, the continental Celtic language, province of the Roman Empire. So pretty much, in a simple way, land of the Romans. Remember how Gal as Galil Gilead. Well, no, that's another one. But Gal in Hebrew would be a circle. So when Galil appears in scriptures, for instance, we talk about how spiritually represents the repetition of history when the circle begins once again. The circuit, just like when the sun goes up in the morning to begin his circuit, as we see it in scriptures, also referring to that as the representation of Messiah coming for the congregation, as the groom coming for the bride. So that would be referring to how just this, but in Hebrew, right? How this would be written in Hebrew. It's not a Hebrew word. That's why it says here for an origin. I was just saying regarding the pronunciation of it, what it would mean in Hebrew. So, like I was saying, in the spiritual sense, then the land of those who, well, of the circle, or the repetition of things, as in the end times when everything would be fulfilled once again, regarding how, for instance, Mashiach was killed. Now the two witnesses will be killed, just like John the Baptist and Mashiach were killed 2,000 years ago. They came to bring the truth. They were rejected and killed, just like the two witnesses will in these times. Just like other things, like the second Exodus, repetition of the first, of course, but now more amazing. The fact that there will be 10 plagues during the seals and the trumpets, that's also key. There will be a repetition of that. The two witnesses as Moshe and Aharon, when they killed the two witnesses, it seems to be, according to Revelation 13, a repetition of the sacrifice made by Eliyahu when he made people choose between Yahweh and the Lord, right? When he said, will you worship Yahweh or Baal? Baal in English is the Lord, right? So all of those will now be fulfilled again in a greater way and last time. So that's why the circle and that word in Hebrew, at least, is key regarding prophecy and the fulfillment of those prophecies. Also, remember how it said the land of Gali or Gauz. So it pretty much it told us what the place was as the capital of the Roman Empire. But here we see another thing. Gali, a Galus was a eunuch priest of the goddess. So in that case, right, it would make reference to a false Elohim, the land of the priests of that false goddess. Interestingly enough, as I was talking about prophecy, this goddess is connected with prophecy. And it says here, a mother goddess, right? Just like the great whore of Babylon, whom they call the mother, great mother. Just like, well, Lilith is the mother of all demons and other connections, right, to that same entity, which was worshipped by the Israelites as the Queen of Heaven, as we see in Jeremiah. Now, with that said, let me continue or begin again. Shaul, an emissary, not from men nor by a man, but by Yahushua HaMashiach and Elohim, the Father who raised him from the dead, and all the brothers who are with me to the assemblies of Galatia. Favor to you and shalom from Elohim. Once again, favor to you and shalom from Yahweh the Father and our sovereign Yahushua HaMashiach. Favor and shalom. Yahushua brought the favor. He said, I did not come to bring peace, although he gave us the spiritual peace, which is that which surpasses all understanding. But he didn't bring peace to the world. As I always say, what one fulfills spiritually, the other physically. So Yahushua gave the spiritual peace. Now the last will bring the physical one, meaning true world peace, not the one that the world will offer through the beast. So favor to you and shalom from Yahweh the Father and our sovereign Yahushua HaMashiach. So my point was favor as in the first, shalom as in the last. Who gave himself for our sins to deliver us out of this present wicked age, according to the desire of our Elohim and Father. So who gave himself for our sins, Yahushua HaMashiach, of course, to deliver us out of this present wicked age. And well, although he may have received it in prophecy, of course, they were living in a completely different time, right? Different generation. And in the physical, they had no idea how bad it would get. Yet that generation was already called a wicked age. And obviously also, this wicked age can refer to the whole of human history, when there would be wickedness. And Yahushua came to save us from that wickedness of this reality, right? Because Yahushua came to save everybody who came in human history, not just those who were living during the time that he manifested. So, to whom be the praise forever and ever. Amen. I marvel that you are so readily turning away from him who called you in the favor of Mashiach to a different good news. This is amazing. It should be amazing to people to read, because, and I mean, it became amazing to me when Yahushua revealed himself to me, or Yahweh revealed his son to me, his name, and then everything became to be clear regarding what the scriptures say, as in this case, because when we were in Christianity, they would talk of the apostasy as something that was going to happen eventually, because we were born in that doctrine. So we were taught that that was the good news. Those were the good news. And then an apostasy would happen when the beast or the antichrist would manifest. Yet when we come to the truth, we realize we were already in the apostasy, because we were receiving false good news. And when you try to explain this to a Christian, it is so hard for them to understand it. They reject it because they cherish religion so much, their religion so much, their club and their friends and all of that, that they see it as I would have to get rid of everything, and I don't want to. So they fight against the thought, the notion of it being wrong. But we see that in the time of Shaul, pretty much 1900, more than pretty much 2000 years ago, he was already saying this: I marvel that you are so readily turning away from him who called you in the favor of Messiah to a different good news. It was already happening. So imagine in 2000 years what would have happened. I mean, of course, we would be born in a lie. Not only that, we can also see the prophetical aspect of this book. Even though it was written for people in that time, it fits perfectly for our time, because even now there are different good news being developed. Even some, sadly, now that the name is being revealed, some are using the name to make false doctrines, or continue in a false doctrine now with the name, sadly. And that confuses some people, because we would expect at the beginning of receiving the name that anybody who would have the name would do good and perfect from then on, but it's not the case. And it wasn't the case 2000 years ago either, as we can also check in the scriptures. But that's why we need to read the scriptures to understand those details, so that the flesh or the enemy through the flesh doesn't bring doubt or confusion in any way. So they were already turning away from him who called them in the favor of Messiah to a different good news. So they were not turning, then in their view, in their mind, they were not turning away from Yahweh. They were turning away from things they didn't like or they didn't understand from the true good news, and following people who were teaching different good news, different doctrine. We go to 2 Corinthians 11:4. For indeed, if he who is coming proclaims another Yahushua, like for instance, Jesus, Yeshua, Yahusha, or many other that they have made false names, perversions of the true name. For indeed, if he who is coming proclaims another Yahushua whom we have not proclaimed, so how can we know if they are proclaiming a different Mashiach? Only if we read what the prophets and the apostles or emissaries proclaim. Only through reading what they wrote, we're going to know who the Messiah is truly. But people don't want to read, I repeat, because of, well, there are so many reasons why they avoid it. For indeed, if he who is coming proclaims another Yahushua whom we have not proclaimed, or if you receive a different spirit which you have not received, or a different good news which you have not accepted, you put up with it well enough. So, going back to Galatians, a different good news, which is not another, only there are some who are troubling you and wishing to pervert the good news of the Messiah. So I marvel that you are so readily turning away from him who called you in the favor of Messiah to a different good news, which is not another, right? Because they claim is the same, and they sometimes, like I just said with the name, they do claim to worship Yahweh and Yahushua, but they want to cause trouble. We've seen a lot of that lately when it comes to this ministry, right? With some people, different places. But also that they want, like, since they have trouble in their minds or hearts with something they do not understand, as in people had issues with Shaul or Paul, so they would go and do their own doctrine. And then Paul would say, it's fine, let them do it as long as they preach about Yahushua, great. Whatever issues they have with me, that's their problem. And he noticed the hypocrisy and all other things that led to this, pretty much to the fact that they ended up making a false doctrine or different good news, which is not another, only there are some who are troubling you and wishing to pervert the good news of Messiah. In that case, remember, in that time, they were, well, it still happens, they were trying to put circumcision as something that they had to get, even with Mashiach. They were perverting the good news, as well as other things that they were trying to put in the doctrine to keep from the falsehood that they followed before Mashiach manifested and brought the truth. So, however, even if we, and this is amazing, even if we, so Shaul is saying that even if he, for instance, like Shlomo, who turned away for a while from the Father and ended up writing things that he shouldn't, that helped a lot of wicked people to do witchcraft and stuff like that. So Shaul is saying, even if we were to say something different than what we already told you, don't accept it. And that has to do also in a prophetical way with books that would come out saying that they were written from them or something like that, and had teachings that were completely against, or that had no connection to the scriptures. So they were not inspired truly. and they were not written by them. But people would write books and put as in the title, the name of a famous person, in hopes that people will go to read their book. So he says, however, if we or a messenger out of heaven, so even if the apostles themselves or a malach from the heavens bring a good news to you beside what we announce to you, let him be accursed. So Shaul, and I find that interesting because he's pretty much, I mean, I find it interesting because a lot of people are against Shaul and think that Shaul was an somebody who was sent from the Jews to destroy the doctrine of Mashiach, the doctrine of Yahushua, and to lead people away from Judaism and all of that. So they think that Paul was actually writing things to confuse people and lead them away from the Torah, just because they didn't understand what he wrote. And he himself here tells us, it doesn't matter who I am. What matters is the message. Because even if I tell you another message anytime, or whoever, whatever, don't accept it because it's just wrong, it's false. So, however, if we or a messenger out of heaven bring a good news to you beside what we announce to you, let him be accursed. That's why if a malach appears and doesn't accept Mashiach, Yahushua, he's a fallen angel trying to deceive. And there are many of those, and that's why there are so many doctrines in the New Age and all of that nowadays. For instance, regarding the false gospel or good news, and I say gospel as they call it normally. Remember last week, we had somebody who claimed to believe in the scriptures, who claimed to believe in the Almighty and his Son, false names, but remember all the things that he said that had nothing to do with the good news, had nothing to do with the scriptures, really. It was all about personal interpretation. As we have said before, now I say again, if anyone brings a good news to you beside what you have received, let him be accursed. So he had to repeat it for a confirmation, because it needs to be understood that there is only one belief, one true doctrine, and it is what it is written, what was inspired by the Ruach. And it was already being changed 2,000 years ago. So how can we expect to have been born in the true doctrine? And how can we expect that without actually checking it ourselves? If salvation is personal, we should all personally look into it and not leave that to somebody else. So, as we have said before, now I say again, if anyone brings a good news to you beside what you have received, let him be accursed. For do I now persuade men or Elohim? Or do I seek to please men? For if I still pleased men, I should not be a servant of Messiah. I love this verse. And it's so important to understand it and keep it in mind, because the flesh and the enemy will try to make you please men, because that's what the enemy does. He has the eyes in the things of men, so that men can have their eyes on him. But we shouldn't focus on how people will think of us. Obviously, we need to be a good example. But if that good example, according to what the scripture tells us to do, is not good enough for them, then too bad. It's sad, because they don't understand neither the scriptures nor what a good example is. They are expecting an image that the world itself has sold to them. So, for do I now persuade men or Elohim? Right? We are trying to get Yahweh to be with us for eternity. Like when, since the wedding of the Lamb, we need to be, we want to be one with Yahweh through Mashiach. like when there's a wedding and the couple becomes one. So we are hoping to be with him, not with the world. So we are not trying to attract the world in the sense of the way the world wants to um, do things. Like, what I mean is, many churches, they add things of the world. They start to change the way they congregate and the way they do it in order to please everybody so that more people will go. But at the end, they go astray from the things that they should actually be doing. But they don't do those things because if they did, not that many people would go. So we are trying to make Yahweh want to be with us. And we expect other people to want that as well. And once they do, then they will come and be one with us. We are not focused on men in the sense of giving men, humans, what they want in the flesh, because then they will go away from the Father. Obviously, we need to preach to everybody and give them the good news, but we shouldn't change the good news in order to get them, right? Which is what people do. They think that it is more important to get the souls, but if they change the good news, what are they getting the souls for? Who are they getting the souls to? Right? So it is important to always remain true. For do I now persuade men or Elohim? Or do I seek to please men? And listen to this. For if I still pleased men, that means that that's what he would do when he was a Pharisee. That's what Pharisees did. That's why they killed Messiah, because they wanted to keep that power. And that's why they then paid so that nobody would know the Messiah resurrected, because they would be hated and stoned by the people. But they wanted to please the people. So they would control the people and obviously lie to the people. For if I still pleased man, I should not be a servant of Messiah. So when a person wants to please men, he is no longer a servant of Messiah, but of men. And most congregations, all churches are pleasing men. And I make known to you, brothers, that the good news announced by me is not according to men. I love this as well. All of this. And I love it because you guys know that a lot of people question or try to go against the fact that I am here teaching, because I don't have a title from a certain university, or because I do not come from a certain church doctrine or whatever, because of the look, because of the music, because of things that they do not understand, or just because they don't like it in their personal taste. They think that Yahweh doesn't either. And that's not how things work. So I find this beautiful because I find it very personal. If I were teaching after going to a university for 5-6 years, well, yeah, just to put a number, learning theology, then I would be teaching everybody something that a university taught me. So it will be a teaching of men. Just like all the opinions in Judaism, they are teaching opinions of men, interpretations made by them, therefore commandments of men. So, and it says, and I make known to you, brothers, that the good news announced by me is not according to men, not according to men. For I did not receive it from men. I did not receive it from men, nor was I taught it, but through a revelation of Yahushua the Messiah. Exactly. And when it comes to my case, I didn't see Yahushua in person like Paul saw and all of that. But it was Yahweh who gave me the name, who led me from that moment on to understand everything that I'm teaching nowadays. It was him through his son, Yahushua, that has taught me what now I am teaching. It was not a man, although, of course, I have read books from men and I have gotten ideas and connections and obviously knowledge in general. But the main revelation, the good news, the doctrine has come from Yahweh. And that is why also a lot of people ask about who else is teaching exactly this. And I haven't seen it. I haven't found it. And it would be wonderful because it would be wonderful for what we are teaching and learning to be taught everywhere. But I haven't found it yet. And it is because of that we are reading here, because it was not focused on what men wanted to hear or were expecting or were finding in theology university, in a church or whatever. And I make known to you, brothers, that the good news announced by me is not according to men, for I did not receive it from men, nor was I taught it, but through a revelation of Yahushua HaMashiach. For you have heard of my former behavior in Yahudaism. For you have heard of my former behavior in Yahudaism, how intensely I persecuted the assembly of Elohim and ravaged it. There he was trying to please those above him that hated the believers. And he thought he was trying to please Elohim, of course, because he thought it was all the same. And I progressed in Yahudaism beyond many of my age in my race, being more exceedingly ardent for the traditions of my fathers. I progressed in Yahudaism beyond many of my age in my race. So he was ahead of himself, ahead of everybody else when he came to the understanding of Judaism, the way they were being taught. He was at the top of his class in every way. And it's interesting the connection that he makes here. Being more exceedingly ardent for the traditions of my fathers, not for the scriptures, not for the truth, but for the traditions. And that is being focused on the traditions of men made him be at the top of the class, because that's what that class was all about, traditions and men. And I progressed in Yahudaism beyond many of my age in my race, being more exceedingly ardent for the traditions of my fathers. But when it pleased Elohim, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his favor, which is wonderful because he understands, as we should all understand, that he called us from our mother's womb, even though we were for many years somewhere else doing what we shouldn't, or thinking or preaching or believing things that we shouldn't, in the sense of they were false, but they all had to happen for us to understand why they were false and how bad falsehood is. So he had to go through this to become who he became, Shaul, Paulus. He had to go through being a Pharisee, and even to go through the fact of persecuting believers, even though that had to be very hard for him when he came to understand what he did. But when it pleased Elohim, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his favor, my point is that he's not saying when he called me in Damascus, he's saying from my mother's womb. Damascus when we reconnected, when it continued, when the change came for his life. So, but when he pleased Elohim, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his favor, to reveal his son in me, to reveal his son in me. That is another one of those connections that reveal that Shaul represents the last. Because to reveal his son in me, as Yahushua being in Paul, as in Paul being a second manifestation of. Remember that he who is sent represents the one who sent him in every way. We just saw in the beginning of the chapter that he said the emissary of Yahushua, just like in Revelation 22, Yahushua says, I am sending my emissary, my messenger, my malach. The last represents the first, just like the first, Yahushua represents Yahweh himself. Yahweh sends Mashiach the first, the first sends the last, and the last sends Eliyahu. Like the four worlds, the four letters of the name, and the levels of interpretation. So the fact that it says to reveal his son in me and not just through me or through my teachings, but in me, is the fact that he represents the second coming. But in the second coming, it's not like they have taught it in Christianity, because it is the second coming of Yahweh. Yahushua remains at the right hand of the Father while he comes to bring his enemies down to his footstool, as he said in Psalm 110. So the last comes as Yahweh and being the messenger of Mashiach. So Mashiach reveals in himself in him, as in we see it here, to reveal his son in me, that I might bring him the good news to the nations. Just like Yahushua came to his own and they rejected him, now the last comes to the nations. That's why he has to come as one of the nations. That's why we had to be dispersed throughout all the nations. So the last comes from the nations and preaches to the nations, so that Yahweh can give a chance to both his people, Israel, and all the nations to all become one in Mashiach if they desire, if they believe. To reveal his son in me, that I might bring him the good news to the nations. I did not immediately consult with flesh and blood. This is wonderful, right? He didn't think about what the flesh thought regarding his calling from Yahweh. He did not stop to think about the flesh, meaning about the world, the physical, what that meant to everything that he had done with the traditions of the fathers and all of that. So once again, but when it pleased Elohim, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his favor to reveal his son in me, that I might bring him the good news to the nations, I did not immediately consult with flesh and blood, neither did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were emissaries before me. That is amazing. He didn't go to consult, for instance, with the Pharisees and say, like, should I do this? Should I listen to that Yahushua who appeared to me in Damascus and blinded me for a while? He didn't consult this with the flesh, with his own flesh, we could even say, about putting doubt. He didn't consult it with the Pharisees. He didn't consult it with the leaders. He didn't even consult it with the apostles, with the disciples of Mashiach. So sure was he of what he received and what he had to do, that he wasn't focused on the acceptance of men, of being accepted even by the disciples. He didn't go and check with them. And that I find amazing, because it shows that he wasn't trying to please men, but Yahweh, and that's it. Obviously, he loved the disciples, respected the disciples. He himself put the disciples above himself, right? He says he is the least of them. So it wasn't a matter of respect, honor, or lack of love that made him not go to check with them. It was the security that he had received the revelation from the Father through Mashiach himself. Neither did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were emissaries before me, but I went to Arabia, and returned again to Damascus. Interesting that the Mount Sinai is around here. So we know that Shaul represents the last, and the last is the witness like Moshe. So we see when he's called, he doesn't go to check with, in the case of Moshe, he doesn't go and check with the Pharaoh or with anybody else regarding the revelation that he had through the fire. He goes and does what Yahweh sent him to do, bring Israel out of Egypt. And then they go by the desert, and Yahweh gives them the Torah, the revelation. Now we have Paul, who is going in his way to Damascus, receives the revelation, and he goes not to the people to check about the revelation, but he goes pretty much to teach from there. And he goes through Arabia, which, like I said, connects with the fact of Moshe going through it as well to get the Torah. Then after 3 years, I was going to say something about this, but now with this, I'm going to say it for sure. This, like I said, connects with the Torah received by Moshe and the people. What was that?
I was thinking when it says I went to Arabia, that it reminded me how Eliyahu was also sustained or fed or kept alive by the Arabs or whatever is.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Just made the connection.
Yeah, just like Moshe went to Arabia, and that's where he got the Torah pretty much. Right? They tell us nowadays that the Mount Sinai is somewhere else. Right? The tourists go somewhere else than the original, which would be in Arabia, Saudi Arabia. Now, Moshe goes to Sinai, which is also Horeb. Eliyahu goes to Horeb in Kings, and he is fed by Arabs, although because of the way it is written in Hebrew, it is also translated by others and seen as if he was fed by crows, right? Which, like I have said, it is possible because Yahweh can do anything. For sure, he can do that miracle, and it would represent something else that I have mentioned in certain studies, because the crow represents Samael, and that would show how Yahweh would use even an angel that does evil, that causes destruction, that represents evil itself. Yahweh can use him because he made him, and there's revelation through it, which I'm not going to explain at the moment. But if they were Arabs, it has also other connotations, as in this case, it connects once again with Moshe, Eliyahu, which are the two prophets, or the representation of the two prophets, the two witnesses, I mean. They both go to that mountain. They receive revelation from the Father. And now we have Paul, who is a representation of the last, who is connected with Moshe, and also went to Arabia. So, yeah. Then it says, and return again to Damascus. Damascus is translated as the silent weaver of sack, or he who, let me find it here, 17. Silent is the sackcloth weaver. The two witnesses, they dressed in sackcloth. And the last comes like a thief in the night, so he has to be silent. And not silent when it comes to not preaching, but the way he does it, just like when Yahushua was asked certain things, he was silent. Like he was silent, for instance, when being judged. He didn't answer the Pharisees as they expected or wanted. And when people would know who he is, he would tell them to be silent, not to go and proclaim that he is Messiah, amongst other things. So Damascus, or Damascus, connects with the two witnesses who come in sackcloth and silent, in the sense that it will only be revealed to those who are part of him, part of the congregation. So from Arabia to Damascus. And right when he mentions the silent sackcloth weaver, we see that he says, then after 3 years, just like the two witnesses, will preach for 3 years and a half. So then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to learn from Kepha, right? From Peter. So then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to learn from Kepha and remained with him for 15 days. 15 days, half a month, which is interesting because, like I said, 3 years and a half. He mentioned just 3 years and now a half a month. Also, the 15, right, is the numerical value of the name Yah, Yud Hey. And the mention of Kepha could be seen also as the two witnesses, connection it, right? Now Paul and now Kepha. But also, like I have mentioned many times, remember that Kepha or Keph means stone, like Peter. Right? Peter is the name that they gave him afterwards to the Greek. Kepha would have been the Hebrew. And he represents the first, Yahushua, the cornerstone. That's why Peter, Keph, was sent to the Yahudim, while Paul was sent to the nations. So Keph and Paul, or Keph and Shaul, represent first and last. Now also, it's interesting, the humility of Shaul, because we know that Keph himself said that the things that Shaul wrote are hard to understand. But we see here how Shaul says, I went to learn from Keph, right? Just like the last learns from Yahushua. And even though Yahushua spoke in parables and the last will speaks in a clear way, like Yahushua said himself in John 16, that it would be like that, to bring understanding. That understanding comes through the wisdom received from Mashiach. So then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem. Also, like I said, Keph represents the first. Now saying this is interesting, because like I said, this represents the testimony of the two witnesses, right? The time that they will preach. Before I say that, it's interesting that he's saying that he received the revelation and he went to preach for 3 years, pretty much, without going to see the apostles, without going to see Keph. So he was already preaching. He already knew the good news, but then he went to Keph to learn more, right? To learn certain details, to learn what they lived together with Mashiach, etc. Now in the prophetical, look how it says, then after 3 years, like after 3 years of being going throughout the nations, preaching, going from a desert, the apostasy, or through the desert in the apostasy, wearing sackcloth, silently, like a thief in the night, for 3 years, like the ministry of the two witnesses. They will go up to Jerusalem, where they will be killed, as we see in Revelation 11. So after the testimony, they go up to Jerusalem to learn from Kepha. And that is when they resurrect and go up, and the last becomes one with the first, the stone, and remain with him for 15 days. Like I said, this connects with a half, right? Half a month. Interestingly enough, when that happens, there will be half of the last week of Daniel to go, right? The last 7 plagues. When it comes to the 15, like I said, the numerical value of Yah, when the first and last will become one after the 3.5 years of the ministry. They will become the manifestation or representation in human form of Yah, Yud Hey. And also on the 15th day of the 7th month, which is the month when they will be killed, the 2 witnesses, that is when Sukkot begins, and that is when the congregation must flee to then be reunited with the Messiah after Sukkot, which would be in Shemini Atzeret. And I saw no other of the emissaries except Yaakov, the brother of the sovereign. Yaakov, a brother in the flesh of Mashiach. Right? This is another verse that we can show Catholics who say that Miriam went up still a virgin because Yahushua had a brother. Well, just in case you do that, they will say that this means cousin. Yeah, just so you know. No, it was a cousin. It was a cousin. They just said brothers back in the day. And yeah, they didn't have a word for cousin, but he had brothers in the flesh. Joseph with Miriam had children after Miriam had Mashiach. We see that in Matthew 1:25. And I saw no other of the emissaries except Yaakov, the brother of the sovereign. It's interesting that Yaakov is the name of the third patriarch, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Just like Abraham represents Yahweh, Yitzhak represents Yahushua the first, Jacob represents the last. So this name connects with the last. And it's interesting that he was the brother of the sovereign, in this case, this Jacob, because we know that the last, who is like Jacob, is the prodigal son. And in the story of the prodigal son, he has another brother, actually the firstborn, his older brother. Mashiach was the firstborn of Miriam, the older brother of Jacob. And Jacob, as the prodigal son, will be the representation of Paul, the only one, as it says here, and I saw no other one of the emissaries except Jacob, the brother of the sovereign. And what I write to you, see before Elohim, I do not lie. This is important as well. He doesn't have to defend himself or his doctrine because it is the truth. The truth defends itself. All you have to check it is with Yahweh himself. So, and also thankfully to the Father, as I always say, just go and check it. It's in the scriptures. Go and see. All you got to do is read it and then take it to the Father and see, Father, is this true? As it says here, and what I write to you, see before Elohim, I do not lie. Then I went into the districts of Syria and of Cilicia. And obviously, of course, here as well, he's talking about not only what he writes in the letters that he wrote of the scriptures, which are all true and can be checked with the Torah to understand that he was speaking truth, but also the fact that he just said this regarding taking so long to see the apostles, right? Because many people would be like, oh, you crazy. Why would you do that? Why? And it is because people wouldn't understand that he wasn't looking for the acceptance from humans, but from Yahweh, and that was enough. And that goes against pretty much everybody's mentality when it comes to how to deal with society. So, and what I write to you, see before Elohim, I do not lie. Then I went into the districts of Syria and Cilicia. Let me check these names. Well, Syria is there, Syria, which is in Hebrew, Aram. Now that's weird because Aram is exalted. exalted. Aram, which was Syria, or is Syria. But it says probably of Hebrew origin, and they write Sur, which is actually Tyrus. You see? And that's a rock. So that may be an error in the concordance, because Aram, as you see here, Aram is exalted. And as you see here, it's translated 67 times as Syria. So that may be an issue in the concordance. So then we got Cilicia, the land of Celix. Exalted, and the land of Celix. So afterwards I came into the regions of the exalted. There's nothing else here, right? All right, so I'll continue now. And what I write to you, see, before Elohim, I do not lie. Then I went into the districts of Aram, the exalted, and Cilicia. Interesting that he goes to the exalted after having gone up to Jerusalem. And like I said, the two witnesses will go to Jerusalem, be killed in Jerusalem, and then go up to the Father to become one with the stone, the cornerstone. He who is the brother, as in the prodigal son. And then he'll be exalted, for Yahweh will give him authority, and he will be brought to the throne, as it is written in Revelation 12. Also, obviously, he will go to the Father, who is the one who is exalted over all things, of course. So then I went into the districts of Aram and Cilicia, and I was still not known by sight to the assemblies of Yahudah, which were in Messiah. So imagine all this time, 3 years plus, and he was still not known in person by the congregations of Yahudah that were already in Mashiach. And this will connect with how the lads will go and preach, but not necessarily in person to everybody in the world who will hear the doctrine and follow it in Mashiach. But also, once again, the fact that he comes like a thief in the night. And I was still not known by sight to the assemblies of Yahudah, which were in Messiah. But they were hearing only that. So that's interesting. They were hearing, because even though now with the technology, you can hear and see at the same time, see and hearing, like seeing and hearing in the spiritual is a bit different, because remember that the last comes like a thief in the night. And those who are his sheep will listen to his voice and recognize him through the hearing, because faith comes through hearing, and hearing through the word of Yahweh, not through sight. So that's why it's mentioned how he had not been seen, just like the lads won't be recognized specifically, even though a lot of people will be already listening or following the doctrine. And I was still not known by sight to the assemblies of Yahudah. And it says Yahudah, which we know represents the few, the chosen few. I was still not known by sight to the assemblies of Yahudah, which were in Mashiach. But they were hearing only that the one who once persecuted us now brings us good news, the belief which he once ravaged. So they were like, some had doubt, no doubt, regarding if he was doing this to capture more people, if he was being truthful, while others were praising Yahweh for such a miracle. The one who once persecuted us now brings us good news, the belief which he once ravaged. So they were esteeming Elohim in me. They were exalting Yahweh in me, which is wonderful, right? Because of what Yahweh did through Shaul, so many people were given honor to Yahweh. in the sense of the last, people will give honor to Yahweh eventually for whom he chose, in the sense of the fact that he raises from the lowest depths those who are seeking him in his presence, in the sense that many people who will be part of the chosen few wouldn't be ever selected by the world, right? That which the world rejects is pretty much what Yahweh chose. And that becomes an issue for a lot of people who are still in the world, have a view of the world and don't understand it yet, don't know it yet, who end up rejecting a lot of what Yahweh does, or the people that he chose. Like Paul was before he came to Mashiach. He rejected all who accepted Yahushua and wanted to kill them all. That's why it was so amazing that he switched his mentality once he received the revelation.